If you have ever wanted to watch your friends slowly descend into despair, Tergrid God of Fright is here to help. Every discarded card, every sacrificed creature, it all becomes yours. So, let's dive into the deck and read her. Tergrid God of Fright has Menace, and whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Tergrid doesn't just punish, she takes. Every discard and every sacrifice turns their losses into your power. This deck forces cruel choices for your opponents. Lose the cards in your hand, or give me your best cards. Either way, I get the upper hand. Your opponents will be left with nothing but regret and maybe a little grudge. Let's dive into the cards that are all about getting rid of your opponent's stuff, because nothing says fun like watching your opponents scramble to keep their hands full. These cards are what you want to cast when Tergrid is out on the battlefield to really get their full benefits. First up, we've got Arterial Flow. For just 3 mana, this one forces everyone to discard 2 cards. Now, if you're playing against 3 opponents, that's up to 6 cards that you can take for yourself. Next we have is Augur of Skulls. This one is a really super simple, easy way to really just get more value and stuff out of your opponent's hand. You want to make sure that you're sacrificing him on your upkeep, so that way you can force an opponent to discard 2 cards. Make sure to regenerate him again so you can get that value over and over again. Awaken the Erstwhile is actually one of my favorite cards in this deck. The reason why is because it's a bit of a game changer. It forces everyone to discard their entire hand. You don't just get a couple cards, you get every permanent your opponents discard. With Tergrid in play, you're basically snagging every opponent's hands, of course besides instants and sorceries. Burglar Rat sneaks in and makes each opponent discard a card, allowing you to snatch up their goodies. Up next is Creeping Dread, an enchantment that keeps the discards rolling. On your upkeep, each player has to discard a card, but there's a twist. If an opponent discards the same card type that you discarded, they also lose 3 life. That means more stolen cards for Tergrid and a little extra pain for your opponents, making it a win-win for you. Okay, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, but Delirium Skeins? They take things to a whole nother level, ripping 3 cards from every player's hand for just 3 mana. With Tergrid in play, that's a massive haul of stolen permanents, turning what should be a drawback into a devastating advantage. It's cheap, efficient, and leaves your opponents scrambling to recover. Necrogoyf adds even more discard pressure while growing stronger as the games go on. Its ability keeps opponents empty-handed. And while Tergrid usually snatches up discarded creatures, there will be times when stolen creatures end up in their owner's graveyard. As that pile grows, so does Necrogoyf, becoming a serious threat that benefits from the chaos you've created. Oppression is a nasty one. It forces your opponents to discard whenever they cast spells. So not only are they losing cards from your other effects, but they also have to pay a price for every spell they try to cast. It really slows them down and makes it harder for them to do anything meaningful. Rankle's Prank is all about choices. Your choices. Each player can be forced to discard 2 cards, lose 4 life, and sacrifice 2 creatures. With Tergrid out on the board, that means more permanents for you, fewer resources for your opponents, and a lot of pain all around. Whether you're going for full devastation or just chipping away at their board in hand, this spell keeps the pressure on. Stronghold Rats is a sneaky little menace that keeps the discards moving forward. Its shadow ability makes it pretty much unblockable, ensuring that every combat forces all players to discard a card. With Tergrid out, that means more stolen permanents for you, turning every attack into another opportunity to snatch up your opponent's best cards. Unnerve is a simple but effective way to drain resources, making each opponent discard 2 cards for just 4 mana. With Tergrid in play, that's up to 6 permanents hitting the battlefield under your control. All your opponents are left scrambling with fewer options. Now, For the last cards in this section, I decided to group these creatures together because they basically do the same thing. We have Elderfang Disciple, Virus Beetle, and Nezumi Informant. These little guys enter the battlefield and make each opponent discard a card. It's a simple effect, but it adds up fast, especially when Tergrid starts to pick up all those discarded goodies. This section covers cards that control the board, while forcing them to make tough sacrifices. This deck excels at making opponents' creatures and resources disappear, turning every loss into your gain with Tergrid's power. Each sacrifice keeps the pressure on and strips away their key pieces. Kicking things off, we have a Cursed Marauder, which makes sure that no board stays safe. When it enters the battlefield, each player is forced to sacrifice a non-token creature. That means your opponents can't hide behind endless creature tokens. They'll have to give up something real. Archfiend of Depravity puts a hard cap on your opponent's creature strategies. At the end of each opponent's turns, they can only keep 2 creatures. Everything else is sacrificed. This forces your opponents to make tough decisions. It makes it nearly impossible for them to start building that board state. And of course, with Tergrid in play, those sacrifices don't have to go to waste. You get the leftovers for yourself. Maybe with how salty this deck is, your opponents are going to try to take you out. And Archfiend of Spite makes them pay for it. Whenever it takes damage, that damage's controller has to either lose that much life or sacrifice that many permanents. So whenever they're trying to chump block, deal damage to it, or swing in, they'll have to think twice before making a move. Butcher of Malakir is a great tool for reinforcing your board control. Whenever one of your creatures dies, whether it's one you control or the Butcher of Malakir itself, each opponent has to sacrifice a creature. This is a fantastic way to make your opponents suffer for even the smallest of setbacks. And it keeps the pressure up. With all the sacrifice triggers that we have in this deck, Butcher of Malakir makes sure that no creature dies without consequences. Death Cloud is one of the most devastating spells in this deck. For how much mana you pay for X, it forces everybody to lose that much life, sacrifice that many creatures, discard that many cards, and sacrifice that many lands. What makes this so potent for your deck is that when your opponents lose their permanents, Tergrid takes control of them. This can leave your opponents with a significantly weakened board, while you get to rebuild with the spoils of their sacrifice. It's a perfect way to clear the field and making sure your opponents are struggling while you reap the rewards. I have actually played this deck with my husband Caden, and no joke, once I played this card, he surrendered and never played against it again. So here is the important note with this card. Land hate is one of the saltiest ways to play the game, so be prepared for the potential backlash you might get. We do have another grouping of creatures, and that's because, again, they do the same thing. So we have Demon's Disciple, Fleshbag Marauder, and Merciless Executioner. They make each player sacrifice a creature when they enter the battlefield. It's a simple but effective way to clear out some creatures and trigger Tergrid's ability to snatch them right up. Doomsday Confluence is one of those cards that can really throw your opponents for a loop. It does cost a bit of mana, but for that cost you get to choose 3 potential modes. You can make each player sacrifice a permanent, because who doesn't love a good sacrifice? Or you can force each opponent to discard a card. For a little bit of some extra spice, you could even create a 3/3 Delict creature to add some muscle to the board. Here's the goal though. We don't really want to be using it for the 3/3 creature. You want to be choosing the sacrifice mode or the discard mode. The great thing is you get to pick whatever mode you want as many times as you want, as long as you paid the mana for it. Fraying Omnipotence costs 5 mana, but it really shakes things up. Every player must sacrifice half of their creatures, discard half of their cards, and lose half of their life. It's a perfect way to kind of hit the reset button and make things a little bit messy. With Tergrid out, all the permanent losses are yours for the taking, while your opponents might struggle to recover. It's a powerful way to turn chaos into control, putting you in the prime position to take over the game. Plaguecrafter looks like it would fit right in with Fleshbag Marauder, Demon's Disciple, and Merciless Executioner. But unlike the others, if someone has nothing left to give and they can't sacrifice a creature, well, they don't get off easy. They have to discard a card instead. So no matter what, Tergrid ensures you're walking away with something, while your opponents are left with even less. Pox is pure chaos in card form, and I love it. For just 3 mana, each player loses a third of their life, discards a third of their hand, sacrifices a third of their creatures, and loses a third of their land, rounded up of course, because fairness isn't really the goal here. With Tergrid on the field, all that sacrifice and discard becomes a buffet of stolen permanents, leaving your opponents in ruins while you reap the rewards. Just an important note, this one's very similar to Death Cloud with land hate, which makes it really salty. So probably check with your play group and friends to make sure that maybe it's not too salty for them to play against. Have you ever seen a video where someone does something just terrible? And to try to get out of trouble, they just start saying, "It's just a prank, it's just a prank, bro." Well, this card reminds me exactly of this. Rankle, Master of Pranks, brings a touch of mischief to your board control. With flying and haste, he gets in for damage quickly, and when he does, you get to choose as many of his abilities as you want. Each player can discard a card, sacrifice a creature, and lose life. With Tergrid in play, those discarded cards and sacrificed creatures become yours, making Rankle an absolute menace that can turn every swing in with him into a nightmare for your opponents. If your opponents get upset, you can just tell them, "It's just a prank." Rush of Dread is a powerful sorcery with a flexible spree mechanic that gives you control over how it affects your opponents. You can make target opponents sacrifice half their creatures, discard half the cards in their hand, or lose half their life, each rounded up. The best part? You can choose multiple opponents to target with these modes, whether you're clearing their board, disrupting somebody's hand, or pressuring their life totals. Rush of Dread adapts to whatever situation you're facing, making it an excellent tool in Tergrid's arsenal for taking advantage of sacrifices and discarded cards. Smallpox might look like it hits everyone equally, but in a Tergrid deck, fairness is just a lie. For 2 mana, each player loses 1 life, discards a card, sacrifices a creature, and sacrifices a land. Sure, you take the hit too, but with Tergrid out on the board, you're the one walking away with all those discarded cards and sacrificed permanents. Your opponents lose resources, while you gain more. Zat's Will offers powerful versatility. Each opponent sacrifices their strongest creature, helping you clear the board of major threats. Then you can exile all creatures from graveyards, creating 1/1 black thralls for each card exiled. I love this card specifically for its forced sacrifice of opponents' strongest creatures. Not only does it take out big potential threats for you, but now it's your big threat. Tergrid's Shadow forces each player to sacrifice 2 creatures. Simple, brutal, and exactly what this deck wants. With Tergrid out, that's up to 6 creatures making their way to your battlefield. The Eldest Reborn is a slow but devastating saga. First, each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Then they discard a card. And finally, you can reanimate any creature or planeswalker from any graveyard onto the battlefield. With Tergrid, those first 2 chapters can really swing the game heavily in your favor before you even get to the big payoff. Willbringer Demon forces each opponent to sacrifice a creature on their upkeep. This effect helps add pressure, forcing your opponents to make difficult decisions. With Tergrid on the board, any sacrificed creature becomes another potential asset for you to gain control of. This deck's card draw comes with extra perks. Scrying, forcing discards, and pressuring sacrifices. These effects keep your hand full while making opponents think twice about their choices, keeping you ahead and your opponents on edge. Bad deal. Okay, now this one does have a hefty cost. It is 6 mana, but it allows you to draw 2 cards and it forces each opponent to discard 2 cards, and everybody loses 2 life. If you have Tergrid on the battlefield, the discards become even more valuable. And not only do you get to help replenish your hand, but you also get to pick up the discarded cards, giving you the advantage while draining your opponents of their resources some more. It's a great way to fill your hand and to keep the pressure up on everybody. Bandit's Talent. This 2-mana enchantment is a great early game tool that makes each opponent discard 2 cards when it enters the battlefield. But what makes it really shine are the level up abilities. At level 2, during each opponent's upkeep, if they have 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 2 life. And once you're up to level 3, you can draw an additional card for every opponent with 1 or fewer cards in hand. It's an awesome way to keep the pressure on your opponents while building your own hand, especially when Tergrid's around to make those discarded cards yours. For 5 mana, you get a 5/4 flying creature that allows you to draw a card during your upkeep at the cost of losing just 1 life. It's a reliable card draw engine for you, especially in a deck that wants to keep your hand full and maintain pressure. While it doesn't directly impact your opponents, the steady card draw advantage that helps you stay ahead, especially when you have a way to leverage it with Tergrid. Blood Pact. This is a simple and effective card. You lose 2 life, you draw 2 cards. It just helps you keep your hand full and keep up the pressure. Eye of Vecta. This artifact lets you draw a card by paying 2 life, giving you an efficient way to keep your hand full. It's an easy to use, low cost option for card draw, and in a deck like this where you're trying to generate value from each card, it helps you keep your momentum going. Greed. For 4 mana, Greed lets you pay 1 swamp and 2 life to draw a card. While the initial cost gets a little bit hefty, it helps you keep your hand full for more discard or sacrifice plays. Indulgent Tormentor. A 5 mana demon that gives you card draw at the beginning of your upkeep unless a target opponent sacrifices a creature or pays 3 life. This pressure forces your opponents to either give you card draw advantage or lose valuable resources. Morbid Opportunist is another great way to keep your hand full. It triggers each time a creature dies, but only once per turn, whether it's your creature or an opponent's. Given how much sacrifice you have in this deck, you'll often be drawing cards from your own triggers as well as your opponent's. Phyrexian Arena is a 3 mana enchantment that triggers at the beginning of your upkeep. Each turn, you draw a card and lose 1 life. It's just a steady source of card draw, which is crucial to keeping your hand full. Read the Bones is a 3 mana sorcery that lets you scry 2, then draw 2 cards while losing 2 life. The scry helps you filter through your deck to maybe find what you need and helps you get more cards in hand. Bitter Downfall. Now this one doesn't directly feed into Tergrid's ability, but it plays an important role in keeping the board under control, and it helps you remove a key threat at instant speed and can help maintain your advantage. And the extra life loss adds a little bit of punishment for your opponent. Core of Ambition is a fantastic way to keep the pressure on your opponents. When it enters, you become the Monarch, which means you get to draw an extra card each turn. But the real kicker is its secondary ability, which is when you're the Monarch, you could have an opponent either lose 6 life or discard 2 cards. If you're not the Monarch, well, they still have to either lose 3 life or discard a card. Doomblade is one of those classic removal spells. For just 2 mana, it destroys any non-black creature. Simple as that, it's just great for getting rid of pesky creatures that might be causing you some trouble. Fel Spectre is a great tool for disruption. When it enters the battlefield, you can target an opponent to make them discard a card. Plus, whenever an opponent discards a card, they lose 2 life. It's just great for draining life while also controlling your opponent's hands. Go for the Throat is a solid black staple removal spell that destroys any non-artifact creature. It's simple and efficient. Hero's Downfall is another go-to removal spell. For just 3 mana, you can destroy any creature or planeswalker, making it a versatile answer to a lot of threats. Painful Quandary. It's an enchantment that really puts your opponents in a tough spot. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, they either have to discard a card or lose 5 life. This is a great way to slow down their game plan and make them think twice before casting spells. Professor Onyx brings strong utility to your deck with her versatile planeswalker abilities. Her +1, pretty much a filter, right? Getting a card into your hand that you want. Her -3 is a powerful removal tool, forcing each opponent to sacrifice a creature of greatest power. And the ultimate ability can turn the tide of the game, punishing opponents by making them repeatedly discard cards or lose life. This effect creates an overwhelming pressure and can cripple their resources in the late game. Sudden Edict is just a great sacrifice spell that forces an opponent to sacrifice a creature of their choice. Vindictive Lich is a 4/1 creature that's perfect for creating tough decisions for your opponents. When it dies, you get to choose 3 different abilities to target different opponents. One has to sacrifice a creature, another discards 2 cards, and the last loses 5 life. Its low toughness actually works in your favor, especially in kind of more of a pillow fort strategy, because it discourages opponents from killing it unless they want to lose something valuable. First up, we have Arcane Signet, right? It's a commander staple, just helps you ramp. Charcoal Diamond is a great budget mana stone, even though it has a slight delay. Felvar Stone taps for 1 mana of any color that an opponent's land could produce. This is helpful because in some cases, you'll steal permanents that aren't in your commander's color identity, and having this flexibility can help you activate abilities of different colors that you might need. Gilded Lotus taps for 3 mana of any 1 color. This is just a great staple for monocolored decks. Heraldic Banner taps for 1 mana of your commander's color identity, and it also has the extra benefit of that Anthem effect, giving you a little bit of some extra damage. Mind Stone taps for 1 colorless mana and can be sacrificed to draw a card. It's a simple ramp option, but it also allows you to dig for answers when you need them. Prismatic Lens is a simple mana stone with a filter ability that is useful for activating the abilities of stolen permanents. Soul Ring! Thought Vessel taps for 1 colorless mana and allows you to have no maximum hand size. Worn Power Stone is very similar to Soul Ring, except for it enters the battlefield tap. It's a solid budget ramp option and helps you accelerate your game plan pretty quickly. Bonder's Enclave is not only a great land, but useful for drawing extra cards. We also included the 3 most common sack lands: Evolving Wilds, Mirrored Landscape, and Terramorphic Expanse. They're useful for getting lands out of your deck and onto the battlefield. Besides just tapping for mana, Gaia Reach Sanitarium helps by forcing discards and drawing you cards. With 31 swamps, this deck focuses heavily on black mana to power your plays. It provides the consistency you need to keep the strategy rolling. That's all for today's Tergrid deck tech. The total for this deck comes to... Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to join the fairest community in all of Magic the Gathering. Until next time, keep stealing the show and your opponent's permanents.